All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack a timeline that has absolutely baffled the world since 1948. For over 7 decades, investigators, historians, and armchair detectives have obsessed over a single unidentified body found on an Australian beach. Today, we're going to look strictly at the facts derived from our source documents. We'll be mapping out the evidence, the wild theories, and a staggering modern breakthrough, just to see how deep this rabbit hole really goes. Here's how we're going to break this down. First, the discovery on the beach, then the suitcase and that infamous torn page, followed by the code and the nurse. After that, we'll hit the theories, false identities, the massive 2022 DNA breakthrough, and finally, the mysteries that still remain. So, Part 1. Discovery on Somerton Beach, December 1948. We kick things off at dawn on December 1st, 1948. A perfectly fit, middle-aged guy is found dead, propped up against a seawall near Adelaide, South Australia. He looked so incredibly peaceful, legs extended, feet crossed, that a couple walking by the night before literally just thought he was a drunk guy sleeping it off. But the autopsy, it told a totally different story. His stomach was deeply congested with congealed blood, which is a classic textbook sign of poisoning. But here's the kicker. Chemists couldn't find a single trace of any known poison in his system. None. And it gets weirder. The guy was effectively a ghost. No wallet, no keys, zero ID. Someone had meticulously, and I mean meticulously, snipped every single maker's tag out of his clothes. He only had a few random items on him, an unused rail ticket, an American-made aluminum comb, some juicy fruit gum, and a half-smoked cigarette just resting on his collar. Oh, and he had an Army Club cigarette box, but it was stuffed with a totally different, much pricier brand called Concedas. It all feels so deliberate, right? But it gave police absolutely nothing to go on. Which brings us to Part 2, the suitcase and the torn page, stretching from January to April 1949. The investigation basically hits a brick wall over the holidays. But then, police finally locate his luggage, and it escalates the strangeness entirely. Notice the crazy lag time here? It took over a month just to find his suitcase, which had been checked into a railway station cloakroom the day before he died. And even wilder, it took 4 whole months and a second autopsy to find a tiny hidden fob pocket stitched deep inside the waistband of his trousers. Now, when investigators finally cracked open that unclaimed bag, they struck gold. Well, thread, actually. They found this highly unusual, warm, sepia-toned orange linen thread. Under a microscope, it was a perfect match to the thread used to patch up the very trousers he died in. Boom, confirmed connection. But even with his actual belongings, police hit another wall. Almost all the tags in the suitcase were ripped out, just like his clothes. They did find a few items marked Keen or Keen, but naturally, a nationwide search turned up 0 missing persons by that name. Plus, he packed some really weird stuff. An electrician's screwdriver, a table knife ground down into a sharp, shiv-like tool, and a stenciling brush, the kind usually used by merchant Navy officers for marking cargo. But all of that pales in comparison to what was in that hidden trouser pocket. In April, the pathologist unrolled a tiny scrap of paper found inside it. It had just 2 words printed in an Oriental font, Tamam Shud. It's a Persian phrase, and it translates to, "it is over," or "it is finished." You can imagine how the public and the press absolutely lost their minds over this. Moving on to Part 3, the code and the nurse, July 1949. That little scrap of paper kicked off a massive nationwide hunt for the exact book it was torn from. Tamam Shud is the final phrase of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, but not just any copy, an extremely rare New Zealand first edition. And get this, an anonymous guy actually walks in and hands over the exact book. He claimed he found it just casually tossed onto the back seat of his unlocked car on November 30th, the night before our guy died. And yes, microscopic tests confirmed the scrap was unequivocally torn from that specific book. You literally can't make this stuff up. But the book had more to give. Under a UV light, police found faint indentations on the blank back cover. Someone had scribbled 5 lines of capital letters, with the second line crossed out, like some sort of baffling code. Australia's top codebreaker at the time thought it was an acrostic cipher, using the first letters of words in a message. But to this day, it remains totally uncracked. Now, here is where we need to flag a major dispute in the case files. Also indented on that book was an unlisted phone number. It belonged to a nurse named Joan Thompson, who lived right in the area, just a short walk from where the body was found. The files refer to her as Justin. When police questioned her, she completely, adamantly denied knowing the man, but her secret unlisted number was physically indented on his book. Was she lying to protect herself? Was it just an insane coincidence? Our sources are completely conflicted on what her actual involvement was. All right, part 4, theories and false identities spanning from 1949 all the way to 2021. With so few solid answers and all these theatrical clues, people went wild with theories over the decades. Let's look at the big 4. Number 1, Cold War spy. The unbreakable code, the missing ID, the completely undetectable poison, it definitely screams espionage. Theory 2, suicide. The Rubaiyat's whole theme is about living for the moment, and it is finished makes a pretty poetic sign-off. Number 3, murder. His stomach was deeply congested, but there was no vomiting, which is really odd for poison. And 4, heartbreak. Did he travel all that way to see Jo Thompson get rejected and end it all on the beach near her house? To make things even messier, the historical record is just chaotic. Over 70 different people falsely identified this guy over the years. Some swore he was a British seaman named H.C. Reynolds. Others were positive he was an Austrian milliner named Karl Helben. But the biological facts don't lie. Absolutely no missing person matched his fingerprints, his dental records, or his DNA. Which brings us to part 5, the 2022 DNA breakthrough. This is where science finally catches up. Back in 1949, they embalmed and buried him, but they also made a plaster cast of his head and shoulders. Thank goodness they did, because fast forward 73 years, and independent researchers managed to extract DNA from hairs permanently trapped in that original plaster cast. Using modern genealogy, they dropped an absolute bombshell. They officially identified the Somerton man as an Australian guy named Carl Webb. And suddenly, a huge puzzle piece clicks into place. Remember the name Keane on the suitcase tags? Well, it turns out Carl Webb actually had a brother-in-law named John Keane. He was probably just wearing hand-me-downs. It makes so much sense. Finally, part 6, the unsolved mysteries. Now, you'd think that wraps it all up with a nice little bow, right? Not quite. We have to point out a very real, ongoing dispute here. Those independent researchers declare the case closed. It's Carl Webb. But the South Australian police, they are keeping the investigation totally open. They exhumed the body themselves back in 2021, and they flat out refused to close the book until their own forensic tests completely corroborate the findings. And honestly, this perfectly highlights the limits of science. Yes, we have a name, but DNA can't decode a cipher. We still have zero idea what that scribbled 5-line code actually means. We don't know the exact rare poison that caused his massive internal bleeding. We don't know if he was murdered or took his own life. And we still have no real idea what his connection to John Thompson actually was, or why he was on that beach on that specific night. So, I'm going to leave you with this. Getting a name is truly only half the battle. The Somerton man might not be an invisible ghost of history anymore, but the real truth of his final lonely hours, that is still buried in the sand. If he really is Carl Webb, what secrets do you think he took to his grave? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. Keep questioning the evidence, and we'll catch you next.